Lost in a Secret World. A Datura trip report by Kelly B 975. Posted to earwood.org September 1st, 2006. Well, I am a 24-year-old girl that likes her share of partying and experimenting with substances. I mostly drink alcohol, and I'm not used to any kind of hallucinogenic drug. My boyfriend and I share an upstairs-downstairs house in a small town. My boyfriend's one friend called and said that he had some trip that we would be interested in. When he brought it to us, I was shocked. I remember seeing them spiny seed pods all over as a little kid. They told us in order to get the whole trip feeling that we would have to take all the seeds out of the pod, put them in all our mouths, and chew them for a good 5 minutes, swallow them, and wash them down with water. They totally did not know what they were talking about. For a matter of fact, they did not even know the name of the plant. I did all the research for them. Unfortunately, 2 days after I did the stuff. I was a bit reluctant at first to do this, because I did not believe that nothing that grows as a weed could make me see things. My boyfriend did not need anyone to twist his arm to take them. He munched them down as soon as he saw them. I ate them anyways at about 5:30 p.m. Immediately after, I got extremely thirsty, and no matter how much I drank, I couldn't quench my thirst. Right after that, my body felt very heavy and I was very tired. "Alright guys, I've got to go to bed now," I said to them. They told me if I did, I would ruin my trip. How wrong they were. I didn't care what they said. I went to my room and laid down. It gets kinda hazy from here on out, so bear with me. I remember laying there thinking that I was so tired, but for some reason, I wasn't falling asleep. I threw my legs over the side of the bed and tried standing up. My bed's on the floor, so it's not very high up. There was no way. I even tried using my hands to push me up, but fell on my face and got discouraged. I probably tried about 10 more times before giving up. I must have fallen asleep for like 6 to 7 hours because the next thing I remember was seeing the clock that said 1 a.m. I remember I glanced at the clock almost the rest of the night. My boyfriend was asleep down on the couch, and when I woke him up, I was horrified at the sight. His face was very distorted. There was no dimension to his face. You know if you sleep on something and get wrinkles in your skin? Well, he had hundreds of wrinkles on his big, square, flat face. Plus his eyes were huge slits, and his lips were huge as well. Kinda like the people on Maui. It had me so scared. All I kept thinking was, there's no way I can stay with him if he's gonna continue on looking like this. Then everything is a blur again. My boyfriend must have wanted me to come up to bed with him, because the next thing I remember is that we were in the bedroom. We had our overhead light on, which cast a yellowish tint on everything, but the tint played a big part on my trip. I was looking at my foot chest next to my bed, and was terrified once more. I saw millions of bugs. I think the reason I had that vision is because right now my cat has fleas, and we were constantly seeing them, and it was really pissing me off. Anyways, there were about 1 million of these cockroach things crawling around. I saw these 2 very different bugs that I had never seen before. The reason is because I made them up. They were 2 very large, multicoloured beetles of sorts. I'd actually seen them moving around. I had never in my life had a fear of bugs, but for some reason, I was totally mortified by these things. I woke up my boyfriend, who was restored back to normal, thank God. I was frantic. I told him that he had to get them or I wasn't sleeping with him. At this point, I was very annoyed with the bugs and my boyfriend that didn't seem interested in the bugs whatsoever. I kept walking up and down the stairs very slowly, like a person that couldn't even walk. Finally, I remember being upstairs in the bathroom. I looked in the mirror and had 2 black eyes. I thought that my boyfriend had beat me up. I kept sitting on the toilet and trying to pee, but only a little dribble would come out. I kept going back to the bedroom, looked down at my hands, and it looked like I had a terrible sunburn. I remember being very panic-stricken and feeling like I was going to have a heart attack. I remember having many discussions with my boyfriend at how scared I was. He says I was talking gibberish the whole time. I also had a thought that I was going insane and would never be normal again. The next thing I know, I got really, really sick. My boyfriend helped me to the bathroom. I puked in the tub twice, on the toilet and on the sink. It was mostly just the seeds and an orange coloration of some juice that I'd drank earlier. There was a mess in there. I think me puking might have eased the tripping feeling, or at least put it into some kind of perspective, because when I went back into the bedroom and saw the bugs, I wasn't afraid. I found a hammer and decided to try killing them. I smacked a roach, and it just disappeared. And that is when it dawned on me that I was just imagining all of the bugs. Once I came to that conclusion, I started feeling a little more calm. I went over to our window and saw 2 hummingbirds flying right out in front of me. I looked at the tree branch and I saw 34 more perched on it. I yelled to my boyfriend to come and see, but he didn't even respond to me. I didn't even pay that any attention. I studied the birds a little longer and decided just to go to sleep. I went over to the light switch to turn it off, and this was a huge task, as my body was no longer responding to my brain in this moment. I was like 5 feet away from the wall, reaching out, batting at the switch. My boyfriend says that it took me like half an hour to finally get the light off. Up to that point, I had completely forgotten about taking the Datura, and when I remembered, I was like, wow. I then was ready to lay in bed with my boyfriend. I'm not sure if I was still hallucinating or not. I would shut my eyes and go into a very weird state of mind. I would think that I was smoking a cigarette and having a very in-depth conversation with my boyfriend, and suddenly jolt back to reality thinking I had dropped my smoke and I was burning my boyfriend and frantically searching for it. After 2 or 3 minutes, I figure out that I was, again, imagining all of it, and lay back down. I must have done this at least 25 to 35 times over a period of 5 or 6 hours. Finally, about 12 in the afternoon, we rolled out of bed, and we both noticed the blurred vision which shortly wore off. His pupils, though, were dilated for 2 whole days, whilst mine were not. I would have to say, off of my whole experience, I wasn't exactly dissatisfied. Yes, I did get very, very paranoid, but after I realised that it was because I had taken a very powerful drug, I just seemed to really calm down. I wish that I would have done the research for this stuff before I just indulged in it. The kids that sold us the stuff ended up apologising for selling it without even knowing what it was, and that they were never going to do it again. That is how bad it scared them. I guess 15 of the 30 people that munched the seeds went to hospital. In my opinion, it's because they didn't have enough knowledge of the stuff they were messing with and the lack of somewhat good supervision. I know if my boyfriend wouldn't have been there, I could have possibly ended up in the hospital. Even though he wasn't really paying attention to me, at least he was there to bounce my crazy ideas off of. I know if he would have freaked out about the bugs, I would have flipped. On a 3rd day, I regained my ability to read. A Datura trip report by Ignatiu. Postdatura.org, May 22nd, 2020. It was a fine Friday day, but I just couldn't shake the boredom off from me since the morning. At around 3 PM, I decided to go for a stroll. There is a tranquil lake and a forest approximately 4 kilometers away from my house. I had no intentions of getting high or abusing any substance that day whatsoever. As I'm walking up to the lake, I can feel myself immersing into a more exhausted and extremely bored state. 10 more minutes, and I would have reached the lake. But there, I saw this magnificent plant, which I recognized instantly. Judging by the shape of leaves, it was either Datura metal or stramonium. The plant was dead, but lucky for me, it had dozens of intact seed pods. I kneeled down, opened a single of the seed pods. Loads of seeds poured out of it. I tore a paper from my journal and poured seeds in it. I collected seeds from 3.5 seed pods, and my Datura seed collection was complete. I still have no clue why I needed that much quantity of seeds, but whatever. I left the plant alone and continued to the lake. It was already visible from a distance, and that's when I thought to myself, hell, what's the worst thing that could actually happen if I eat these? And I ate around 10 seeds. They tasted like a dried out watermelon seed. I continued walking, but something in my head suggested to eat a few more seeds. So I'm just strolling, approaching the lake and snacking on Datura seeds while I do it. And I feel a body heaviness, but I wasn't delirious or high. I reached in my pocket to put on my sunglasses, but they were gone. I was certain I had dropped those while collecting the seeds, so instead of walking around the lake, I decided to go back, in hopes of finding those sunglasses. As I'm walking back, I noticed that all this time, I'd been snacking on those seeds like they were peanuts, and eventually, I was out of them. I knew about the dosage, but it seemed to me that I couldn't stop until I was done. I could feel my body weight multiply. It felt like I was carrying an extra 30 kilograms with me. I thought that it was nothing, probably physical exhaustion, and maybe a little bit of seed poisoning. It was around 4:50 when I found the seeds, 5:30 when I chugged them all. On my way back, I may or may not have asked some people about my sunglasses, still not sure, but anywho, they actually had no clue, and I started to feel nauseous. I approached the place where I found the plant, scouted the area but found no sunglasses whatsoever. But, I did pluck some dead Datura for later. I'm walking down the road, nothing unusual. Body heaviness is somewhat gone, and I see a dead cat on the road. Not paying much attention to it, because it was possible, after all, it is a road, in retrospect, that it could have been a hallucination. Luckily, I returned to my neighbourhood safely. I was physically exhausted and would kill for a smoke, but I had nothing on me except the plant, so I sat on a bench, and it was around 6:10. I was all alone, and that's when I lost time. I appeared at my apartment's doorstep. I didn't feel confused, everything felt okay. I rang the doorbell. My mom opened the door, and I greeted her and told her that I was hungry. I went in my room and waited for food. Meanwhile, I called a friend of mine, told him that I ate loads of Datura seeds, apparently he didn't believe, and finally the food was ready. I had no hallucinations, I was just tired, both mentally and physically. Cottonmouth intensified. I ate the food, drank different types of liquids, and before going back to my room, asked Granny to boil me 3, 4, or 5 potatoes. And that's when my mom started noticing things. She asked me what I had taken, and I replied with, Datura seed, everything's gonna be okay. Needless to say, that I thought my speech was fine, but as it turns out, mostly it was gibberish and mumble. I was speaking like I recently had an aneurysm and was recovering from it. My mom asked me whether or not she should call an ambulance, and that is when I felt that the trip was about to kick in, so obviously I replied with no, and crawled back into my room. I laid on bed. Now I could finally relax and enjoy the trip. I saw different types of arachnids on the wall, but out of a sudden I had to pee, Fuck. I got up, went in the toilet. Very few came out. Back in my room, seconds later, this urge to take a leak again. I was growing tired and bored from running back and forth. I couldn't focus on the trip. Soon, I found out that I literally had no pee left in me, and that is when I realised that it probably was a side effect. Back in my room again, laid in my warm bed, took my phone, put on some music, and started reading some irrelevant stuff on the web, when suddenly I heard a loud thunderstorm. I could feel the wind blowing on my face. I turned off the lights, music, devices. Now I could really trip out. But my room was still bright blue and I was confused. I looked around, and there was a thunderstorm in my room which was real. I could see the lightning, hear the sea waves, feel the wind. Lightning cracked my ceiling, and in a way I was terrified. I saw arachnids coming out of the corners, cracks, making webs. Webs were following the direction of a wind which was blowing right in my face. Spiders started their descent, and soon they were all over my very face. I got out of bed, shook the spiders off from my face and body, got rid of the web, and laid back in bed. I thought I'd slept, and that's when caterpillars and different centipedes appeared. I'm scared of those, so I squashed a few of my body. Spiders started trapping and rolling dead and alive centipedes in their webs, pulling them up in the ceiling corners. I was delighted that the arachnids were helping me, but my body was covered in blood. I couldn't sleep like that. Plus I felt that I was overheating, so I decided to take a cold shower. I got off my bed, wearing only boxers. My mom was about to take a shower, but apparently, according to her, I kicked her out of the bath and went in myself. Prior to that, we had a conversation about calling an ambulance yet again, which I cannot recall whatsoever. Seems I was walking around the house, warning my mom, mumbling not to step on the spiders. I'm in a bath, sitting on a toilet. Got rid of an extra weight and went in shower. Spiders were there as well. I was fed up, so I washed them off from the walls. In other words, made the whole place wet. Now I could finally take a shower. I lost time again, according to my mom. I'd started growling and banging on the door, making odd noises, mumbling, "Spiders, spiders, they're everywhere, the spiders are everywhere." I fell in the bathtub, and that is when I regained some fragment of my consciousness. As I'm laying on the bathtub floor, I could feel my body overheat. I was burning up, but I was too tripped out to change the temperature to cold, so I overheated my body even more and lost time again. Now I'm at a bathroom door, naked, except I'm holding a bathroom curtain on my shoulders, using it as a cape. Water's still on, the place is drenched. Miraculously, I managed to open the door, and my mom was standing in front of me, looking at her idiot, completely naked, 22-year-old son, who covered his back and ass with a bathroom curtain in a disgraced manner. My dick dangling around, squatting, trying to pick up non-existent spiders from the floor, yelling, mumbling, and warning not to step on them. I lost time again. My mom told me the following. "As you were trying to pick the spiders up from the floor, I grabbed your arm and told you to sober up. You put your jacket on while still wearing the bathroom curtain, and left pair of 2 different flip-flops. You yelled at me to leave you alone, and that you were going in a climbing gym. I grabbed your arm tighter, and then you started freaking out. I couldn't hold on to you. You started running around, growling and screeching. I was scared. In a few minutes, an ambulance arrived. You were still naked, running around with a bathroom curtain on your shoulders, swinging your junk around, flirting with the medic, asking them if it was her first year in a med school. We managed to sit you down on a chair, but you refused to put on clothes or even a towel to cover up. Your balls were resting on the chair, and your pee-pee was resting on your balls. I felt actually ashamed for you. You were still flirting with her while all this was happening. And then they injected you with something, I do not know. I kind of regained my grasp for reality. I put on a towel on my lap to cover myself up. They measured my heart rate and blood pressure. Medic showed me the numbers. I'm in a med school, and when I saw that my blood pressure was 80, cis 40 dia, with 180 BPM and a very low saturation, I knew I was messed up and I absolutely had to go with them. A friend of mine, to which I called earlier, came at my place to accompany me in the hospital. They dressed me up, but for some reason, they were putting on an extra pair of socks on me. I thought to myself that they were mad at me and just rolled with it. A few minutes later, I'm ready to go. We're in an ambulance car. My friend is documenting my delirium. I'm seeing spiders, smoking phantom cigarettes, answering medics and my friend's questions, feeling great, but looking like a total madman. We arrive at a hospital. They insisted on doing a transfusion of 2 or 2.5 litres of distilled water. I wasn't violent according to my friend, I was humble, answering all the questions, talking about alkaloids in the plant, their interaction, antidotes, medical and pharmacological stuff, etc. I was still tripping my balls off after the transfusion. I may have been in a hospital room, but to me, it was a completely different scenario every few minutes. I'm in a hospital room with my friend, and in a few seconds I'm in a music recording studio with Bob Dylan, talking, discussing some matters which I cannot fucking recall, to be honest. But I'm in the hospital room again, and I realise that I'm still tripping. I completely forgot the latter before. But now I'm in a random dark room with some old friends. I turn around, hospital again. I look around, and I see my dead friend looking at me, crying. I look around again. I'm at my place in my room, alone. Close your eyes, blink, look around, and you're in a completely different place with different people. Back in the hospital room again. I saw that room as a very dark green, yellowish swamp, with spider webs and surgical tools laying around. I'm sitting on a bed, and I start chatting with my friend, who is clearly standing in front of me. And for some reason I look to my left. The nurse was standing there with my friend, communicating, and I felt confused. Looked back, and my friend was still standing in front of me. I looked to my left again. There was nothing. I looked in front of me, a wall. Looked at my right, and my friend was sitting beside me all the time. I realised that I was still tripping, but yet again, the realisation was soon gone. Different scene, again and again, repeating endlessly. Lost time. I was staring at my friend and the acid burn marks on his arms. It felt weird. I wanted to go for a smoke so bad. So the nurse, my friend and me went out. The way I remember it was that I offered the nurse my red Marlboro. We smoked and went back in. I even remember pulling out the pack and putting it back in my jacket. It felt real. Later, my friend told me what happened was the opposite of what I remembered. The nurse gave me a cigarette because I didn't have any. After blood and urine test was done, I wanted to go back home or just out. I insisted that they discharge me, and so they did. We were out at around 3:40 AM. As my friend and I are walking from the hospital to my place, I can clearly feel and see that the trip is still on. My friend told me that I poked him, asked him if he was real. Out of context said that I just don't want to kill certain people. Weird and creepy, I know. And so, I kept on walking back home with my friend, and other friends that could not have been there with us the whole time. As I got home, everyone was asleep, so I quietly creeped in my room. I checked the time, and it was 4:25 AM, and I instantly passed out. I woke up at 11:30, well rested somehow, and had this really vivid, real dream that I thought were a part of my trip. I had a really hard time distinguishing between reality and delusions. Even on the second day I was still fucking tripping, because I saw these spiders on the walls, less to none centipedes, but a few worms here and there. As I'm sitting on the couch, I see how worms are trying to crawl inside of a wooden part of my bed. So I get the lighter and start to burn those motherfuckers, and apparently they were just threads from my bed sheets. My granny stopped me. I couldn't realise that I was tripping. It felt so real, and I was actually upset that she couldn't see them at all. After a few minutes, I noticed a really large arachnid on the floor staring at me, and it wasn't an ordinary arachnid. It had a somewhat demonic look to it. So, I called Granny again, and she of course could not see it. A realisation that I'm tripping begins to emerge once again. Around 3 o'clock, I started searching for my non-existing cigarettes, which I couldn't find anywhere. But I had those, probably in my dream or delirium. I was just so out of touch with reality I quickly forgot what I was searching for, so I started searching for another, Something. What? What was I searching for? Well, I have absolutely no clue. I went back in my room when I didn't find anything. Spiders were still there, and big demonic ones at that. They were looking at me, but I knew it was a trip. Now I was 100% sure I was tripping. So I closed my eyes, opened them, and that's when worms stopped moving around, blinked my eyes a few times, and they started crawling back in the floor near the edges of a wall. Spiders ascended on the ceiling, rolling up their webs, went through the corner into the roof. It was real. Only the big demonic spider was left. I named him the Spider Overlord. And he was staring at me, kind of smiling, and then vanished. Everything was over. I felt a strange calmness radiate throughout my body. I drank a green tea and was bummed about my eyesight. I had this partial blindness. I couldn't read or watch anything for 2 days. On a third day, I regained my ability to read, see, and enjoy the not-so-enjoyable reality, which compared to the trip was very enjoyable. Well, this was written according to my family members, friend, and my stupid brain's account, which tried its best to recall these very moments. Walking Dead Syndrome. A Hawaiian Baby Woodrose and Datura trip report by Dread Pirate Mo. Posted to earwood.org, February 16th, 2020. I'm in my mid-30s. I'm a little over 6 feet in height, and I weigh about 200 pounds. I've done about all the major known drugs imaginable. During the late 90s, I tripped on LSD quite frequently. The experience I'm about to describe happened in the summer of 2013, and is beyond anything I've ever experienced before. I've heard people describe religious experiences on LSD, but of the dozens of times I've tried it, I've never had anything as remotely profound occur to me as did with these woodrose seeds. It was late August, and I was reuniting with a longtime friend. I will refer to this friend as Papa Smurf, for reasons that should become obvious. Papa Smurf introduced me to LSD back in high school. Even back then, he knew about the legal highs, the exotic plants and the more unusual designer drugs that most people had never even heard of. Papa Smurf went on to earn an advanced degree in psychology, but he still remained interested in altered states of consciousness. He was picking me up early in the morning to go hiking in the backcountry of the nearby national forest. I had planned on being a guinea pig, and would be trying something called Hawaiian Baby Woodrose. Being a guinea pig for Papa Smurf wasn't new to me, and it usually turned into an interesting experience, to say the least. We got to the trailhead at about 9 in the morning. That particular trail began at an old cemetery. That's where Papa Smurf pulled out a miniature Ziploc bag filled with what looked to be a few grams of tanned powder. Papa Smurf had used a coffee grinder to pulverize the seeds into a powder. "How many?" I asked. 23, Papa Smurf replied. I had no idea at the time of what constituted a dose at all. I immediately took the bag, opened it up, unloaded the powdered seed into my mouth, and swallowed with the help of a few gulps of water. It wasn't too bad, but I did notice a metallic taste in my mouth that lingered. Over the next half hour, Papa Smurf asked several times if I felt anything. If I did, it was subtle. Approximately 45 minutes into the walk, something hit me like a freight train. I don't know exactly how to describe it, but mostly it was a feeling that something big had happened. By this point in time, I was seeing traces, and everything seemed vibrant and different, but the visuals didn't matter, as it was as if the essence of my very being had changed in some fundamental way, and I just couldn't quite put my finger on it. About an hour into the hike, I noticed that the trees seemed endless, and I blurted out loud, "Haha, there's sure a lot of trees around here." Papa Smurf replied, "Yes, there are." I felt so inadequate because that's not what I meant to say. For me, the forest had somehow become a fractal or kaleidoscope. It was supernatural somehow, but I could not find the language to describe it. From this point on, I felt like I had lost my ability to communicate. I know I must have been sweating and looked horrible. It was so challenging to walk. At some point, Papa Smurf took us off trail and down towards a rocky creek bed. We ended up at a tree that had a protrusion that looked so much like a human head that I felt inclined to treat the tree as if it were a person. I sat down on the bank there and remember thinking that if I mentally let go, I would die. Papa Smurf spent the next few hours stacking stones into immense stacks. While Papa Smurf entertained himself by stacking rocks, I faced an inner dialogue with myself. Somehow, I felt death was imminent. All I had to do was go. I was scared to let go, but for some reason, I felt as if I had to die. I then began to feel as if I were vibrating. Everything was vibrating, and I was part of it. At some point, I opened my eyes and Papa Smurf was in my face and looked really, really scared. I told him I was okay. He said, "I know you're okay." But I could see that he was actually very, very scared for me. I told him, "I just gotta let go." And I closed my eyes and went back to the vibrations that had pleasantly consumed me. Somehow in my own mind, let go meant die, which in turn meant to return to a vibrational state. Papa Smurf later told me that I was shaking and trembling as if I were freezing, but he didn't want to say anything to me because he didn't want to scare me. I could have stayed where we were for hours longer, but eventually Papa Smurf wanted to go. My reality at this time was shattered. I had no choice but to follow Papa Smurf. Not only was my mind blown, but I was physically exhausted. I felt like a zombie. At some point we were walking through the forest and Papa Smurf says, "Oh my god, look at that panda over there by the bamboo." At this point I'm unable to talk at all, but I'm really wondering where we're at and how the fuck we got to some place where there's bamboo and panda bears. Papa Smurf always liked to fuck with you in little ways like this, but this time I truly couldn't be sure of reality. As we walked, I began to realize that I had died on that creek bed back there. Nothing seemed strange anymore. I kept repeating out loud, "I'm here, you're here, and that's just how it is." Papa Smurf said I kept repeating that phrase over and over and over again. I couldn't carry on a conversation, but what I was really thinking was that I had died many times before, and every time it was with Papa Smurf. It had just happened again, and that's just how it was. I felt like I was in some kind of purgatory, where life kept repeating itself up to that very same moment. Every once in a while, Papa Smurf would fuck with me again. At one point he said with a straight face, "I can't believe we've been out here in the jungle for 14 days already." I couldn't say anything back to him, but I certainly had an inner dialogue in my head. I thought, have we really been out here for 14 days? Surely not. I even wondered what country we were in. But then another part of me said, it's just Papa Smurf fucking with me as per usual. But even with that thought, I couldn't be sure. But these kind of episodes were familiar too. I had experienced them many times already. At least that's how I felt. It didn't matter if it was jungle or not, because all of it was pure purgatory. There was another instance where Papa Smurf yelled back to me, "Hey, whatever you do, just don't pick up a rock and hit me in the back of the head with it, alright?" I thought, why the fuck would he say that? Is that what I'm supposed to do? I seriously had this mental dialogue in my head where I contemplated killing Papa Smurf, because I somehow felt I was supposed to do that because he told me not to do it. Those words took on a strange significance. Eventually, we made it out of the forest and to Papa Smurf's car. As we drove, I contemplated the seeming fact that I was already dead, and nothing really mattered, because it had already happened and just kept on repeating. And I became obsessed, truly obsessed with this idea. During our drive, Papa Smurf made an unexpected stop at an apartment complex. He knew the maintenance manager and wanted to say hello. He visited with his friend who was painting an apartment unit. Me? Well, I was unable to communicate, so I decided to go outside and look around. While sitting on the second-story stairs of the apartments we were at, a car pulled up. I was so convinced that I was reliving life in purgatory that I strongly considered yelling out some expletives, simply for the fact that it wouldn't matter because it had already happened somehow. Everything I did or thought about doing was a repetition of something in purgatory that I had already done, and therefore my actions really didn't matter. Fortunately, I did not test this theory of mine. Papa Smurf drove me back to my apartment, now at about 4 PM. I spent the next few hours contemplating everything that had happened. I began to regain my sanity. Throughout the first half of my trip, I had accepted my experience as reality, and the fact that I had done drugs weighed little on my interpretation of that reality. During my later solitude, I began to realize that the substance had induced the experience. I knew I was not dead, but somehow felt as though I had died and been put back together. The rest of my experience occurred in solitude, and I continued to see traces, bursts of colour, and perceptual distortions, but they didn't matter. I spent the rest of my experience reflecting on what seemed to be the most profound experience that I had ever had. Later, that next day, I spoke with Papa Smurf about everything that had happened. He confessed that he had added Datura seeds to the mix. He said he added the seeds so there was more volume in the coffee grinder. He didn't think there was enough for them to affect the experience. His guess was that he added about 70 to 100 Datura seeds. I've since experienced both Datura and Woodrose by themselves, and I can tell you now I think the combination somehow made this experience of mine seem even more real. In reflection, I can't help but think that such an experience could have gone horribly wrong, despite how disturbing it really was. I seriously contemplated murder, jumping off a cliff, and calling someone a racial slur because of the weird mental space I was in. I feel like I could have done any of those things. On LSD, there is always that part of you that knows that what you're experiencing is the result of the drug. I didn't have that with this experience. It was real. On the other hand, It was truly the most profound experience I've ever had. I mean, I was dead in purgatory and intimately aware that I was simply replaying my life for the billionth time. It is a bizarre state of mind to believe this, though the thought of repeating it scares me, that there is a part of me that wants to do this all over again. "5 days awake with insane hallucinations." A 3MEO PCE trip report by The Angry Little Bunny. Posted to earwid.org June 2nd, 2020. Earwid note. The doses described in this report are potentially life-threatening. The amount taken is beyond a heavy dose and could pose serious health risks or result in unwanted, extreme effects. Doses such as this have been known to cause hospitalizations and/or deaths. Sometimes, extremely high doses reported are errors rather than actual doses used. This is a report about the worst psychosis I have ever had from any drug, and I wouldn't be lying if I would say that this was probably the most horrifying experience in my entire life, and I did not think I would survive it. I've used a few dissociative drugs in the past. I mainly was addicted to plain PCE for 2 or 3 months, during which I got a psychosis 2 times, which each lasted 2 weeks, and were horrifying. After a few months of abstinence, I occasionally used 3MEO PCE again, which overall feels extremely similar to PCE. I don't think I could tell any difference. I maybe used it once or twice a week. 5 milligrams would give me light effects which would just make me feel a bit floaty and elevate my mood. After a long abstinence, 15 milligrams already felt really strong. I just get a really typical stimulating and manic dissociation. But tolerance increased quickly, and I soon needed 25 milligrams after a few times, and soon even 40 milligram plus. I would almost consistently get what I call the Alice in Wonderland syndrome, which only occurred rarely with PCE, but I attribute that to permanent changes in my brain, and not the drug. I thought I would be safe from a psychosis if I only use it every few days, but I guess I was wrong. One Thursday evening, maybe 10 PM, I took about 30 milligrams intranasal, and after an hour I didn't really feel a satisfying effect, so I increased the dose to maybe a bit more than 40 milligrams over 2 to 3 hours, which was a dose I took multiple times before. However, the effects were still unsatisfying, and at maybe 4 AM I attempted to sleep, but it was impossible. Towards the morning, I get pretty strong anxiety. I looked in the mirror thinking my face looked extremely deformed and ugly. It was so bad I wanted to cry, but I couldn't. The day went on, and in the evening I had to go to a course. I still didn't feel a bit tired, and the course went from 5:30 PM to 9 PM. On the way there I listened to some Japanese anime music, and when I took the headphones off in the course, the music seemed to have burnt itself into my brain, and I was still hearing it silently, which was extremely annoying and scary. I'm pretty sure this was already the psychosis setting in, because when I looked around, I thought everyone looked better than me. I felt worthless. I also started to occasionally see rainbow-coloured lines around objects. On the train ride home, I suddenly heard a repetitive wow 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 sound, and I thought someone was playing some weird music on loud in the train, because it would go away when I plugged my ears. I tried to ignore this and the slight hallucinations, thinking I just needed to sleep it off. When I got out of the train and walked home, the wow wow sound followed me, which absolutely terrified me. I understood now that if I would hear any noise, it would trigger this sound. I was so terrified that I took 1 milligram of Xanax and slept on the couch where my mum was reading. Overall, I slept about 4 hours, but the most horrifying thing happened after that. When I woke up, the hallucinations had extremely intensified. I saw rainbow-coloured blinking lines and geometric patterns everywhere. When I would rub my eyes, I would see extremely complex, rainbow-coloured fractal patterns changing and eventually disappearing in hundreds of blue pixels that would cover my field of vision for a few seconds, even when I opened my eyes. I tried to cope with it by trying to accept that I have to live with these patterns now. I mean, they look kinda pretty, I guess. When I would take a walk, there were moving patterns in vivid rainbow colours everywhere, almost like as if I had taken a strong dose of some psychedelic drug. I couldn't accept that, because the next night I still couldn't sleep at all. I later was convinced that it was a brain lesion and asked my parents to bring me to a hospital. There, I asked the neurologist for an MRI scan, for which he gave me an appointment, but after describing the symptoms, he also said he's pretty sure it is a psychosis. Afterwards, we went to a psychiatric hospital because I hoped they could help me sleep. I got there at maybe afternoon and then just lied in bed seeing crazy, fractal hallucinations everywhere. I was sure I permanently fucked myself up, and I thought I'd probably have to commit suicide after I get out of here. At about 3 AM, I went to a nurse telling her I couldn't sleep. I overall annoyed the staff a lot in my psychotic state. She gave me a 40mg tablet of prothependal, an antipsychotic medication. I lay back down in my bed, but soon after that my ears felt like they were closing. I was terrified. I got up and found that I was walking as if I had consumed over 2 litres of alcohol. It was really difficult. Went back outside to the nurse because I was so terrified, and she was just really annoyed that I still wouldn't sleep. I told her that I wanted to go home, but she said I had to wait until 10 AM to leave. I spent the night drinking as much water as I can to try to flush out the prothependal and asked my parents to just please take me home. I was extremely depressed on the way home. I was sure I would be completely unfunctional for the rest of my life from this time on. I thought the dose of 3-MeO-PCE destroyed the sleeping part of my brain, and the only way to fix me was to have a surgery where they would implant a new sleeping part in my brain. That's how far gone I was. At home, my mum gave me 2 milligrams of Xanax, but even after 3 nights without sleep, I still could not fall asleep and just started to panic. During the day, I would hear the wow, wow, wow sound, plus police sirens in the background, and I would even get these little light flashes all over my field of vision. I was so terrified, I told my dad, "My God, the 3-MeO-PCE, it's eating holes in my brain right now, and I just want it to kill me as quickly as it can." I even told my parents my password to my phone so they can tell my friend that I died, because I was sure I was going to die in a few days from now. Me and my dad eventually went back to the hospital after 4 nights of no sleep. I felt extremely awake and anxious in the hospital. A psychiatrist there suggested I should take 2.5 milligrams of lorazepam with 4 milligrams of tizanidine every 30 minutes with relaxing music up to 3 times until I fall asleep. So, my dad got the prescription for these 2 drugs, and we went home. Towards the evening I felt extremely tired and kinda stiff. When I looked around I would get strong after images, but it was still impossible to sleep. It felt like there was a mental block preventing me to even enter the half-asleep state when I lie down. At 10 PM, my dad gave me the first 2.5 milligrams of lorazepam with 4 milligrams of tizanidine while putting on some meditative music. The experience was quite nice while I laid there and the drugs started working. I felt like I was spinning slowly and floating down. 30 minutes later, I got the same 2 drugs again, and another 30 minutes later I got another 2.5 milligram of lorazepam with 150 milligrams of trazodone. But I still couldn't sleep, and started to really freak out. About 2 to 3 hours after the first dose, I convinced my dad to give me another 2.5 milligrams of lorazepam. I slept maybe a minute before a horrific nightmare woke me up. I had 10 milligrams of lorazepam, plus other sedating drugs in my body with almost 5 days of no sleep, and I still couldn't sleep. This freaked me out extremely. I cannot really remember what I did next, but apparently I stumbled into my room and took whatever I thought could put me to sleep. Apparently, I even took some Datura seed which I collected last summer, but never touched after that. My parents drove me back to the hospital and apparently I was awake and talking the entire time, but I remember nothing. I only slowly came back to me when I was brought into the hospital in a wheelchair. But first, I actually thought I was dreaming. I literally, and this is no word of a lie, thought I was dreaming about the hospital. I told the doctors that I took 7 grams of Datura seeds and 30 grams of amobarbital when they asked me. They obviously were terrified, because I would absolutely be dead if I took that. I was put on a hospital bed, and there I slowly realised that this was real. And only later my parents texted me what happened, as I had no idea. I was on a heart rate monitor, and my heart rate was at about 120 with high blood pressure. A doctor who watched over me told me to stop moving and lie still to not get a heart attack. I still had slight hallucinations from the Datura, which still were minor compared to the psychosis. Basically, I often would barely recognise the room I was looking at as a room. Everything in my visual field just seemed like random shapes to me. Sometimes the walls changed colour, and the room filled with mist, but this went away over a few hours and I was left with the usual hallucinations. The time in the hospital was horrible. When I would move around or shake my pillow, I would hear entire conversations from the sound. I would hear voices in the sound of blowing wind plus the wow, wow sound, and police siren sounds in the background. Towards the night, I got 25 milligrams of melperone at 10 PM, which is a pretty mild antipsychotic which again didn't help me sleep at all. At 2 AM in the bed is where the hallucinations turned interesting. I could literally pick them up with my fingers. I was almost convinced I was able to see some kind of invisible energy of sorts. I even tried to photograph the hallucinations with my phone and was surprised when they also showed up on the photos. When I looked at them later, the hallucinations, well, they were obviously gone. At 3 AM, a rather nice nurse came to my room and after I told her I still couldn't sleep despite the melperone, she gave me 10 milligrams of zolpidem and she brought me to another room. I was sure this wouldn't help, but to me, a complete surprise, I actually fell asleep for 2 to 3 hours. For the first time in a long time, I had hope again after that. In the afternoon of the next day, I was discharged, but I still had the hallucinations and audio distortions and was really struggling to sleep. For the next week, I was just extremely lethargic and felt horrible during the day, but it slowly got better. After a few days out of the hospital, the visual hallucinations went away. I then had the MRI, which came back, lo and behold, completely fine. Then, the wow, wow, and siren sounds subsided. And now, almost 3 weeks after this started, I still have slight trouble sleeping, and I took lorazepam for sleep the last few days. But I must say, it's getting better, and I'm almost back to normal. I thought benzodiazepine withdrawals were bad, but this was so much more horrifying. Even during benzo withdrawal, I could sleep a bit each night, and I at least knew exactly what it was. I never ever want to take dissociative drugs again, or most addictive drugs for that matter. A psychosis from dissociatives which are stimulating and have a potency close to PCP, such as PCE, 3-MeO-PCE or 3-MeO-PCP, is probably the most horrifying drug experience one can have, and I could easily see how I might have committed suicide during any of this. Beyond anything. A Datura and fluoxetine trip report, where I don't know anymore. Posted to earwood.org May 3rd, 2015. I am a very depressed person. About a year ago, I experienced a trauma that changed how I view the world forever, and made me reconsider every choice I have made and will ever make. I was prescribed generic Prozac to combat this situational depression and PTSD to great success. Maybe a little too good of success. Instead of depressed, I became manic. I was sleeping a couple hours a night, full of energy, had tons of lucid dreams from the pills, and I was always talking a mile a minute. My doctor had me take a break from them, to change meds to something that wouldn't make me so insane. In about 3 days, my mood went right back to intense depression, to to where I could not be functional anymore, and was full of thoughts of self-termination 24/7. On Friday, unknown to me at the time, my boyfriend, A, had gone to my girlfriend H's house and had sex with her. I discovered the truth on Saturday night, told by one of his friends, B, and now one of my closest friends, and punched myself in the face until I bled buckets into the sink. On Sunday, I drove over to A's house and dumped him swiftly and without drama, not really explaining why. I left and went to B's house to talk about it. After a while, he told me that he had tripped before on what he called Hell's Bells, and it sounded intriguing to me. Bad choice. A bad choice indeed. I was in no state of mind to try hallucinogenic. Depression and bad memories were just lurking under the surface of my mind. Not to mention, I was taking the fluoxetine at the same time. Now, I already knew the antidepressant had a very negative effect with alcohol. I threw up all over A on Friday before I went to H's house, and intensified the experience. This is also the case with many other substances, including Datura. B told me he OD'd on 10 flowers, so I opted for 2 maximum. I've read reports of other things, but none of Datura, and was very cautious to approach this substance. At 1 PM, B took 2 flowers in 2 litres of water and boiled them for 30 minutes. He then strained the flowers out and poured the tea into a bottle in the fridge to cool down a bit. We let it cool down until around 1:35, when he poured about half a cup of the 2 litres of tea into a mug with some sugar. This is a very small amount compared to what B took before, maybe even like 5% of what he had. I consumed it from 1:35 until about 1:45, taking care to sip slowly and watch how I felt. B told me it would take up to an hour to set in, so I was prepared to sit around a while. He was sipping on some alcoholic energy drink at the time, not getting super drunk, but a bit tipsy and responsible enough to be my trip sitter. I made sure to inform my friends where I would be in case anything bad happened. At around 1:55, B's mom came in to talk to him and introduce herself to me. I was sitting on his bed against the wall, while he was on the other bed facing me. While she was talking, I began to feel the effects of the drug coming onto me very quickly. While she was talking to him, I was thinking that I should run to the bathroom and try to throw some of it up, since it was coming on so very quickly. This thought was quickly forgotten in the ensuing chaos. Within another 2 minutes, I told B that my heart was racing super fast, and he took my pulse, about 180 BPM. My eyes began to feel very heavy and droop a little. B remarked that they were extremely dilated. I tried changing how I was sitting, but found my limbs to have little coordination at all, like being extremely drunk. I felt a little silly moving around, and smiled at how goofy I must have looked. But this was only the beginning. About 10 minutes into the trip, I slid down, fell over into a lying position, just by letting gravity work. I stated to B that I can't feel my legs, and indeed they were completely numb as if they had fallen asleep. Here is where my memory starts to get a bit fuzzy. I was not feeling good with the loss of control of my body, and felt so heavy that I actually was paralysed. My arms would not move, and neither would my legs. My whole body felt numb, and I told B this multiple times. It took Herculean effort not to close my eyes and succumb to the illness that took me. B then told me that I was not allowed to fall asleep because when I awoke, I would feel even worse than before. He left the room about 15 minutes into it to get something from the kitchen, and came back and asked me what we should do with the rest of the tea, 2 litres, half cup. I told him he should sell it to the neighbours or something, and then he said that wasn't a good idea, and I told him that I didn't care. My speech was getting very difficult to pronounce, and it was very common for me to mix words around, like I was a combination of wasted on alcohol and dyslexic. Right then, my phone started getting texts from my mom. I tried picking up the phone, even though my hand wouldn't respond to me. Somehow, I picked it up and looked at the screen. It then occurred to me that my vision was completely gone, and everything was extremely blurry. I had this very extreme case of double vision to the point where I told B that I had triple vision, even though that is impossible. My phone screen looked like one solid colour, even though I knew for a fact that it was a very diversely coloured background. I desperately tried to read the text, but gave up after a minute of frustration. B asked how I was, and I looked at the posters on his walls. I commented that they looked like a foreign language of gibberish to me, and that English made no sense. I then told him that I felt awful, like my body didn't belong to me, like I was very afraid of not being in control of my thoughts, and that I wished this didn't happen. This was still only about 20 minutes into the trip. B asked me if I wanted to go outside and smoke a cigarette with him, and I told him there was no way I could even move. While he left, I went between blacking out and staring up at the moving ceiling fan. When he came back, I was so relieved not to be alone, that I thought I came back to life. All I could do to acknowledge his presence was to look over and just stare at him, since none of my muscles would obey me. I then noticed my cotton mouth but could not articulate this to B, who was just kind of watching me in disbelief. It was then that I started having the first hallucinations. I'm not sure if it's because I am depressed or because Datura creates unpleasant visions, but everything I saw was extremely disconcerting. 25 minutes in, I saw tons of rats on B's floor scurrying around. This disgusted me greatly and made me feel even more nauseous than before. The visions ranged from small flies in my peripheral vision to entire people sitting next to me. Datura makes one very dehydrated, and B already knew this. I told him I needed to pee. At this time, I'd forgotten where I was, who B was, and I needed help just to sit up from a lying down position. B pulled me up, while my muscles were completely slack to sit up on the bed. This movement made me so sick that I promptly fell back down again to avoid feeling anything bad. He was constantly trying to help me up, since I really needed to use the bathroom, but my nausea was overruling my need to pee. Finally, after about a minute of moving me around like I was a rag doll, B managed to get me standing up, completely supported by his weight. I had no idea where the bathroom was, and I kept stumbling and shuffling and falling over on the 10-foot walk. Once he got me in the bathroom, I realised why I was there. I'd actually forgotten on the way over. Normal environments were very strange to me, as if I had never seen them before. I forgot how to pee properly, so I ended up sitting on the edge of the toilet, moving my skirt aside, peeing all over the floor. I remember thinking that Datura was a poison, since the pee burned like it was acid. Then I pass out in the bathroom for about 20 minutes, leaving B on the other side of the locked door trying to get in and help me. Once I was able to crawl to the door and open it, he took me back to the bed to lay down. B left to get some water for me in the kitchen. At this point, my passage of time was completely out the window. I felt like I'd been sickly lying on the bed for years, and that B had been gone at least for an hour. He gave me the water, which I ended up spilling all over the bed, since I was swaying back and forth while sitting up and leaning against the wall. B was very concerned for me, as it had only been around 40 or so minutes, and I was truly on another planet, very uncomfortable and scaring the living daylights out of him. He immediately called my best friend C to come and pick me up. The next thing I remember, C and B were together in B's room. This was another 40 minutes after he called, since the ride to his house was pretty long. I have no memories between when he called and when she showed up though. An hour and 20-30 minutes into the experience, I did not recognise C or B, even though I have known C for 7 years. My speech was so incoherent that I could not make single words, and I am basing this off of what I've been told since my memory was so poor that day. C tried to get me to drink the water, and I ended up drinking 2 very large glasses of cold water. The strange part about the water was that I just wanted to fall onto the bed and sleep, so I tried putting the water down on the bedside table. The problem here was, though, that there was no bedside table at all. It was a hallucination. My depth perception was so awful that when they gave me the cup again, I reached about a foot short of where it really was. Many of my memories were obscured since C and B let me sleep in 10-minute increments. They would then wake me up, give me water, talk to me, and let me sleep again. The parts I do remember of being at B's house were very negative, and for good reason. B's tipsy rationale, which happened to be correct although very negative, was to try to make me as angry as I could be, in hopes that I would show emotion and brief moments of clarity to snap out of the tripping. First, they tried flicking my forehead while I was lying on B's bed. Since I couldn't move to defend myself, I started yelling at them to stop. Next, C helped me to the bathroom to pee again, but tried to make me mad. I told her I wanted to be alone, but she kept pushing me and forcing her way into the room against my will. I physically fought my best friend, called her obscenities, and screamed bloody murder at her, trying to shut the door in her face. While she was in the bathroom with me, I did not recognize myself in the mirror whatsoever. Finding my way back from the bathroom always proved to be an adventure, since I was constantly confused and very lost. B later told me that I was trying to climb into his bathtub and he asked me why. I told him, "It's okay, I'm just getting in my car. I've got the keys, it's alright B, just stop worrying." He said, "That isn't your car." But I was completely convinced the bathtub was my car, and he had to pick me up and remove me from it since I wouldn't leave otherwise. C had brought another friend at T with her, but I had no memory of T being there at all. C and T were at B's house for 2 hours, but I only have about 20 minutes of memory for those 2 hours. B told C to take me home or to the hospital because he was absolutely freaking out that he had hurt me, killed me. C helped me stumble through B's house while picking me up every time I fell over. By then, I could walk a bit better, and I have brief images of B's house. C helped me down the front steps. On the walk to the car, B kicked a random empty box in the street aside, and I screamed out, "No, not my earrings, I can't lose them!" And this is where I blacked out again, for about another hour. I don't remember getting into the car, the 40-minute car ride, or getting home. C told me that T was sitting in the back seat with me, trying to give me water and talk to me. They became very excited when I apparently spoke an entire sentence, thinking that I was coherent again, only for that sentence to be followed by another half hour of constant mumbling to myself and moaning in utter agony. My next memory was about 5 hours into the trip. My older sister X was in her car with me. Well, how did I get there is what I was thinking. And we were driving to pick up a pizza for dinner, since I was too messed up that night to go out to the restaurant we had reservations for. X gave me pens and paper to draw on, and talked to me constantly. One of the stranger things I did was smoking the pen like it was a cigarette. The whole ride long, I was unsure if my eyes were closed or open, since I saw things regardless. My hallucinations were again many spiders and phantom people looking at me. I was very much unlike myself, and told her the truth about my boyfriend cheating on me. I started cussing violently at what's happened, and I really didn't care what she thought of the whole thing. The next thing I can actually remember was around 8:30 at night, when I was in the kitchen. My mother asked me if I wanted pizza, which I remarked was too cheesy. Not an unusual statement considering I'm lactose intolerant, mind you. Then my father walked in the front door. He is a very reactive and emotional person, and my sister and mother were super afraid of him seeing me in the crazy state that I was and freaking out like usual. "Let's go to your room," X looked at me and said, while my mum agreed. X led me there since I didn't know where to go, and then shut the door and faced me. "We're playing hide and seek from Daddy, just lay down in your bed and be normal, or as normal as you can." I could only nod and get in bed to relax, a testament to the fact that Datura had reduced me to acting like a 3-year-old. At around 9 PM I found myself in my mum's room, laying on top of the covers next to her. At this point my memory was completely fine, so I actually remember all of the hallucinations. I looked over onto the floor and saw a giant spider chasing a bug that was running on the ground. I pointed it out to my mum, who was very confused. I then had delusions that there were my friends next to me on the bed, talking to me about stuff like prom, normal things. I answered them out loud, but turned and realised that only my mum was still there. And so I quickly made up the excuse, which I thought was so smart at the time, that I was simply thinking out loud. She said a bit jokingly that was a bad sign. I then looked down at what I was wearing. This freaked me out that I was wearing random pyjama pants that I had never seen before. I looked at the pattern closely, which actually is black and white sketches of Snoopy riding a motorcycle, and thought that it was a red-coloured Santa bending over and shoving a fire poker up his behind. My thought process must have not been too awful, since I remember thinking, "Dang, that's a weird pattern for pyjama pants." I went to my own room around 9:30, very confused indeed. I was unsure of where all of my stuff was from the day, including my computer, phone, purse. I wandered into the kitchen to get my computer, and left 5 minutes later with only a glass of water. Somehow, I managed to get my laptop into my room eventually. I was convinced that it was my sister's computer, imitating mine. I stood up in my room to look at the stuff on my futon, and realised that my good friend Jay was lying on the couch, talking to me. I chatted with her a little while, then turned to really look at her, and absolutely freaked out when I realised what I thought Jay was turned out to be a sweatshirt folded on the couch. This kind of hallucination, talking out loud to it, and disbelief at it not being real continued throughout the whole night. I tried to locate my phone at 10 by looking around my room, and this obviously was extremely unproductive. I decided to call myself from my mum's phone and listen for the ringer. When I found it, I was curious to see what texts, calls went down while I was tripping the hardest. I was still very much so tripping still at this point as well. Many times through the night I looked at the clocks and saw just a jumble of light shapes tangled within each other. Time had no meaning at all to me. I realised that my vision sucked and I found a random pair of glasses in the kitchen. I put them on and it barely helped. If I had an eye test right then, I would actually be legally blind. The only way to read what was on my phone was to close one eye, put on the glasses, and hold it about 3 feet away while trying to guess what the shapes were saying. My mum came to talk to me in my room later that evening and tried to understand what had gone on with me. C had told her what I did when she brought me home, since I couldn't even articulate a single thing to her. While my mum was in the room, the shadows started changing into frightening shapes, like a shark about to eat me. I looked outside at the silhouette of the hedge and screamed and started sobbing, because I thought it was a man outside my window, standing there, just watching me. At some point in the night I was unable to distinguish my lucid dreams, a product of the fluoxetine, from the awake trips that I was having. Both were equally realistic to me. In my dream I received a present from some girl. I woke up around 11 PM, ransacked my room trying to find the present, pulled clothes out of everywhere trying to find it, and eventually I just collapsed, crying, since I was so disappointed that I'd lost this present. My dreams were all very depressing, in which nobody would look at me or acknowledge my presence in any way. Even if it was my best friend or mother in the dream, it was as if I didn't exist. I would awaken feeling very anxious and scared. The depression was probably a main factor in the mood of my dreams. I woke up the next morning very confused, as if I did not have the whole story as I type it now. It was only later did I piece together, from my skewed memory and others' reports, what actually happened that day. At 7 AM, I made a commitment to go to school, even though I was still tripping quite hard. I borrowed some 2.5 prescription glasses from my mom to help me read in the day, and to be honest, I barely even remember any of school, except for the hallucinations of insects and arachnids that were so fruitful in my peripheral vision. Today is Tuesday. I took Datura on Sunday. I would say that this is the second worst experience I have had in my entire life, second to the trauma that caused my depression in the first place. B and I thought we were being smart by following all of the guidelines for a safe trip, including making a very weak dose, but the fact is I was not ready for it regardless. I overdosed on a potentially lethal substance. There is no way to tell what dose is right for you. The interactions with the fluoxetine intensified my trip beyond anything comprehensible, meaningful. Many people take hallucinogens for a reason, whether it be curiosity, spiritual exercise, or to work out something they have pinpointed. My reason was to escape the present. And Datura offered no escape for me. I was literally trapped in my own mind and memories, and my brain had constant flashbacks to the trauma and awful images of A cheating on me. This was a very unhappy trip, and I'm unsure if others have had very positive experiences with this drug or if it is even possible. But as B said, this is something you only take once. Me? I'll never do this again. It has ruined my relationship completely with C&T. So I must tell you all now, be careful what you do to yourself. an unexpected brief trip to cosmic hell. A Ayahuasca combo trip report of Syrian Rue, Datura and M. tenuiflora by Quan, Aluminium. Posted to earwood.org July 15th, 2025. Introduction. I'd read about DMT for a while. I felt the trip sounded very appealing. Prior to my experience, I had already done high doses of LSD multiple times, so I felt very comfortable with serotonin system-based psychedelic hallucinations. However, I was not prepared at all for the intensity of oral DMT. I sourced an ounce of Syrian Rue and 50 grams of Mimosa hostilis root bark very easily online, and had a natural source of Datura seeds. After a bit of research on the preparation of the potion, I began to work. Preparation. I added 500 milliliters of water to 32 Datura seeds and the 32 grams of Syrian Rue, and began boiling until the water became a deep yellow and the room smelled of coffee and soil. I strained the mixture in a fine metal strainer and repeated the process 4 times, each trial adding less water for a shorter final boil. By the 4th extraction, the water was only a faint yellow, and I knew that all the harmala alkaloids had been dissolved into the golden hot water. The room around me smelled rather foul at this point, and had to open a window and place a fan to reduce the humidity. I boiled the liquid to remove excess water until I was left with 500 milliliters. I determined a dose large enough to get all the MAOI effects should be slightly less than 1/7 of the total, so I settled on 70 milliliters per dose. The Mimosa hostilis extraction was certainly less smelly but far more disgusting. The dirt and plant fibre caked onto the sides of the pot multiple times throughout the experience and had to be washed off into the brew. I did the extraction probably 7 or 8 times until the water was only slightly coloured. I can see why Mimosa hostilis root bark is falsely sold as dye. It produces a deep magenta tone that would certainly stain any clothes it comes into contact with. I added lemon juice to help with the extraction, but I'm not sure how much. After the extraction, I was left with 2.5 litres of the magical drink. I concentrated it down into 1,200 milliliters to make the horrible drinking process more bearable. I added a shot of alcohol to each to ensure that it wouldn't develop any funny bacteria cultures that would give me food poisoning. The process was now complete, and I set off for bed. The experience. My friend, Justin, was absolutely enthralled to try the magic first. So, after fasting for the entire day, he drank 70 milliliters of the Rue followed by 1 cup, 240 milliliters, of the hostilis ayahuasca 15 minutes later. He got basically nothing. Said he had a mild acid body high along with some minor facial distortions, but mainly just unbearable nausea. After 40 minutes, he purged. I thought I had gotten dud root bark. Jesus Christ, how wrong I was. The following day, I fasted. I went to the gym and had very low sugar. I had juice and water before to hopefully avoid passing out. At 9:30, I measured out my dose. I stuck to the 70 milliliter Rue dose but doubled the Mimosa hostilis. I had 2 cups. That's a lot for someone as young and inexperienced as me. I assumed if the grounded root bark I had gotten was super weak, that doubling the dose was reasonable, but it wasn't. Unlike last time, I mixed the brew up very thoroughly before measuring my 2 cups. I drank the stale coffee-tasting Syrian Rue, and 15 minutes later drank the hostilis. I set a stopwatch when I began drinking the ayahuasca. I put a straw in the substance and placed the straw at the back of my mouth to hopefully help with the awful taste, and while it did help, it didn't really do much. The ayahuasca tasted like concentrated citric acid and hydrogen peroxide. The hydrogen peroxide taste made me extremely nauseous. I told myself going in that I wouldn't purge. I did. I got 5/6 through the drink when my body started forcefully gagging. I held it back once, and then again I gagged. The ayahuasca came back into my mouth. I tried to stop it, but the third time I heaved. I vomited all over my desk and floor. I desperately tried to stop myself, but the pain was so unbearable and my gagging wouldn't stop. After vomiting once more on the floor on my way, I made it to the sink and released the brew down the drain. I felt crushed. I had wasted so much ayahuasca. I vomited in the first 3 minutes. Absolutely pathetic. I got a towel and cleaned everything up. Out of anger, I dumped the last fifth down the drain. While I washed out the cup and straw, I felt a placebo. I told myself to ignore it because I figured I may get minor effects, but I really should just go to bed. Then, when my hand moved in front of the tiled bathroom floor, the tiles gravitated towards the movement of my hand, warping the floor entirely. I didn't know what I felt. I felt shock. I wasn't really expecting anything. Only 5 minutes had passed since vomiting. How could I get any effects, let alone what I started seeing? I looked in my mirror. I looked symmetrical in every way, but still recognizable. My skin was smooth and glowing, and my features morphed together. The skin all over my body softly flowed. I stared in shock. The panic became worse and worse. I started walking back to my bed from my bathroom, and every time I blinked, I saw rainbows, coloured lines, and these forming menacing geometric patterns. I felt dizzy. I felt drunk. I felt terrified. I laid in bed and shut all of my lights off, telling myself to just sleep. And I tried to, but I felt their presence. When I had my eyes open, I saw these gods watching me, observing me, judging me. They were only outlined and had no facial features. Their outlines were made of geometric zigzagging lines, and I felt terror. I rolled around in bed for minutes until I knew I needed saving. I called my friend, Joe. He was eating dinner with his family and was unable to do much for me or understand what was happening to me at all. I tried to tell him what was happening, but I didn't feel any better. I didn't feel any less alone and powerless. I became so confused and upset that I hung up on him after abruptly saying goodbye and not to call me. I laid back. The trip began. I closed my eyes and saw the tunnel that everyone talks about. And my room no longer existed. I wasn't in my room. My consciousness, my essence, was riding a fractal. I rode up and down waves. Every time I reached a crest, I forgot what I was thinking about. I lost my train of thought each time. The waves became smaller and smaller to my down and right. They culminated at an asymptote where the gods judged me. They terrified me. Whether I had my eyes open or closed, they were there. While I rode this wave and felt their presence, my visual field was filled with zigzagging, bright lines on a dark, glowing background, and I heard a loud, buzzing sound. My thoughts were incoherent. I begged to be sober, for it to end. I didn't know what to do. I didn't know how to feel better. I contemplated going to the shower or drawing, but both seemed impossible. And I cried as the gods watched me. I begged for a saviour, but no one came. My girlfriend couldn't help me, and she was so far away and didn't approve of my psychedelic use. Neither did my mom. And no one was there to save me. I rode up and down for an eternity. I tossed and turned in my bed. The gods stood still, watching me. I eventually got up when I realised I could. I went to my bathroom and turned on the lights and looked at myself in the mirror. My face was unrecognisable, just glowing noise. When I made different expressions, different parts became discernible. I walked back in my room. I was still freaking the hell out. I knew that I had to calm myself down and found my phone and pulled up some cartoon clips. which, to be honest, didn't make me feel any better. I got up and went back into my bathroom where I had left my sketchbook. It was in the bathtub, drying, as I had vomited all over it. I realised that was a bust, so I returned to my room and the bad vibes continued yet again. I finally decided just to get the vomit-covered sketchbook and use a dry page. 30 minutes had passed. Time made no sense while I was in bed. I drew for the next 10 minutes and I finally calmed down and called Joe. The trip had ended. All I had now was an afterglow of sorts. Even though I vomited immediately after ingesting, I still had the most powerful and horrible trip of my entire life. I went to hell. If there is hell, that was it. No hope, unbearable suffering, no end in sight, and no escape. Lonely, cold, sick. I talked to Joe for an hour. I felt religious at first. Even though I've been an atheist all my life, for a moment I actually believed in God. It was only after the effects fully wore off I stopped believing. I want to be a logical person, but there was a presence there with me. A divine presence, not evil, but unfeeling, chaotic. The only kind of God that would make a world full of this much suffering. I finally hung up with Joe after finishing my drawing of what I had just seen. I went to bed. The experience that I had was only an hour long. If I had not purged, it would have almost certainly been more intense and longer. I woke up the next day sober. I even probably went to bed sober. DMT is nowhere near as sleep schedule ruining as acid. I even had dreams. Pleasant lucid dreams of sexual encounters. I need to be more loving. If I got anything from this experience, it is to be more compassionate, to show more love. In conclusion, even though the experience was in many ways traumatic, I feel like I am a better person because of it. But I would have had a far better experience with someone to help calm me down. All I can really say is, be safe. A dimension I never want to return to. A Datura trip report by Lawrence. Posted at iruid.org, July 15th, 2016. When one of my dealers told me I had to try Datura the summer of my freshman year, I was skeptical. I was working a lifeguarding job, needed to stay sharp. I could be called into action at any moment. He assured me that it wouldn't be a problem. Boy, how wrong he was. He gave me one pod and told me that half would be sufficient. Being an experienced psychonaut, I figured I would take the whole pod. It took about an hour till I felt anything. After about 90 minutes, I began to feel very dizzy and lethargic, a bit like being too drunk. I took a fat dab to try and stabilise, but felt nothing, and just fell asleep. When I awoke, I knew I had made a terrible mistake. Everything was blurry. I was sure I was in an oven. I was really sweaty, and my elbows felt locked. I felt like I really had to relieve myself, but couldn't find the bathroom because I was basically blind. After about 15 minutes or so, my vision started to clear up and I could see. I tried to get off of the couch, but it felt like I left my hands behind and my legs could barely move. With incredible effort, I rolled off of the couch and began to crawl to the bathroom. I pulled myself onto the toilet, tried to defecate. I felt incredible relief until I looked in the bowl and saw that there was nothing there. I tried again. It felt like it was leaking. When I looked in the toilet again, the water had turned to blood. No matter how much I wiped, the toilet paper always came up bloody. As I left the bathroom, I looked in the mirror and saw my father. I knew I shouldn't talk to him, so I just left. The only problem with this sight was that they all had died. Blood was flowing out of all of their orifices. It was horrifying. and I ran back to my room. I tried to go online, but wouldn't turn on. Frustrated, I went to my desktop, but couldn't remember my password. I just wanted to listen to some music, but all I could do was shake my computer. I ran past the party in my living room and out the front door, looked in the sky, and all I could see was this green gas everywhere. I was sure it was making me insane, so I get into my car and just sit there for what could have been years. The next thing I remember, I was back in my house talking to my friend. She kept asking me if I was okay, but I couldn't speak. It was like no matter how loud I screamed, nothing would come out. Then my vision went blurry again, and I may even have passed out at this point. I awoke in what could only be called hell itself. It was like I'd entered a dimension of pure and utter agony. The floor was covered in vomit 2 feet deep, and blood was gushing from my underwear. I waded to the bathroom to find that my dad had left the mirror. He was yelling at a younger version of myself, telling me that I would never be as successful as my brother, who recently died of giardia. I tried to pull down my pants to clean up the blood, but realised I wasn't wearing anything. The only thing, I had a vagina. I'm a man, I must say. I was ashamed in front of my father, and began to weep until I realised I was just crying on the floor of my bathroom at nothing. I decided I needed some water, so I turned on the sink, but no matter what, the water was scalding. I remembered when my brother was really sick. Everything, even ice water, felt burning hot to him. It was like I was inhabiting his soul, and it felt good. I left the bathroom, and my friends had turned into piles of rocks. I tried to piece them back together, but I couldn't hold on to anything. Felt like my hands were covered in grease. Needless to say, the rest of the night was something out of a dimension of unimaginable nightmares. Sometime around 5 AM, I started to come down. My vision was fuzzy, and I kept seeing something moving in the corner of my vision. I went to sleep for a few hours, and woke up relatively okay. The road to recovery has been long, but I'm hopeful that with the continued help of antipsychotics, I will in time be able to overcome the trauma that I experienced on Datura. I would not recommend this to even the most experienced of trippers. What I saw can only be described as my own worst nightmare. A Reality Deep Dream Mix-Up by Annan. Posted to earwid.org, September 23rd, 2004. 0 hours. Me and my friend M each ate 1.5 tablespoons of mature yellow-brown seeds. We chewed them up really good, washing them down with water. T plus 1 hour. We're both feeling drunk and heavy, and decide to lay down on the bed. At some time, approximately 15 minutes after this, we both blacked out. T plus 4 hours. I woke up finding M sleeping next to me, and my friend A from school also next to me, leaning on the wall and aiming the fan at us while sleeping. I tried to wake him, but nothing would work, so I looked at M for help. But instead of M, it was A sleeping next to me. I looked at the wall, and no one was there. I wake up M, and asked him to go home so I can sleep. I felt somehow uncomfortable after all this. T plus 5 hours and 30 minutes, approximately. I'm not sure what went wrong, but I couldn't sleep. Well, I'm laying on my bed, feeling the dryness. I must get some water. The bottle was empty. So I was trying to get up, and I see 2 huge, shadow-like guys with 2 different, weird faces that I can hardly remember, but they were like Matrix agents, but different, and one was fatter, with small red and bright lights as eyes blocking the both of my doors, of which I have 2. I somehow got a grip and reminded myself I'm tripping. I got up in front of the shadow dude, and red circles appear on both of their eyes that start to bleed a lot. I covered my head and waited a while. After that, they were gone. T plus 6 hours. My sister was in the kitchen. I was making coffee for 2. She told me to hold something for her, but I was busy with the coffee, so I passed it to my friend M while saying, hold this a sec, bro. My cup of coffee hits the floor, and M says, "What's wrong with you?" "I just woke up, that's all," I say. I went upstairs with 1 coffee. I lost some time here. Plus 9 hours. Still not too sure of the exact time. Laying on the bed, feeling a bit poisoned, Some bottles on my table were spinning on the spot. The key in the door split to two and started crawling like a worm all over. A crack in the wall was taking over the walls in the room itself. Some grapes I had on the table grew legs and walked around the room. Same with paint dots and black dots on the floor. My floor is hard to describe. I remembered everything was going crazy, but that I was calm. The skull I got was bouncing from one speaker to the other. Wires were moving around like snakes, bloodstains appeared on the walls, and friends were flashing like changing a channel. Some of the friends that appeared didn't want to talk out loud, and instead talked to me within my own head. A bit like telepathy. There were also lots of sparks flying around at some point. I decided to watch a movie on my broken TV and eat out of a bowl of snacks the whole time, approximately 1.5 to 2 hours. At the end of the film, I noticed it was all unreal, and before I was in a total trance. I've no idea what the movie even was, or if it was real. I fell asleep a bit later after this. The next day, I woke up to my mum knocking at the door, asking me for something. I gave her something no way related to what I'd done, and then what she asked for. Then 4 friends of mine were behind her. As she turned, I greeted them, shook hands, etc., and she didn't notice. They sat down, I turned to lock the door and back, and they were gone. I laid back down on my bed. My t-shirt that was on the bed turned into this mini mad cow with spiralling red-orange squares as eyes and horns of a demon. It ran straight to me, and I freaked and jumped back. But then, it just became the shirt again. Day 2, T plus 5 hours. I find myself ending a chat with a tree. The grass started growing really high, so I went back in. After that, I remember sitting in the living room and looking at pictures that had their own little life to them. I spent most of the day talking to people, animals that weren't there, my cat, my MJ plant, the skull on the speaker, and smoked unreal cigarettes while I had 2 packs, which one was real and one wasn't. I remember twice I smoked, the cig was gone, take out a real one, but from the wrong pocket, taking another fake cig that would disappear after 2 minutes. Smoke sometimes came out of real objects, and some shadows are moving with no connection to these objects. I took this whole trip as a once-in-a-lifetime, and last trip to a very, very deep place in my mind. The after effects from this were long-lasting and very, very scary, as in a thought of, wow, I've completely messed my whole life up now. But thank God, this was all gone. 3 to 4 days of really messed up eyes, splits, fogged blurry vision, etc. That's all I really had. So, for about a week, I was feeling really weird and unconnected to the world. And I must say, smoking weed sometimes made things fly in the corners of my eyes and stuff. All I can say is beware. Her Soul Lingers On. A Datura and Morning Glory Trip Report by Mandrake. Posted to earwid.org December 16th, 2003. She captured me, sucked me in, drove my mind crazy, and I loved her grasp. So, I see people all the time now who don't exist. Big deal. I wake up in the night and think that people are in my room. I talk to them, then they disappear and I wonder why they ran away. Sometimes I get a spot of colour stuck in a certain place in my vision for days on end. My mind is alright though. I'm as smart as I ever was. But this feeling lingers. I grew her from the ground up. I went to the store, bought the seeds, and put her in the soil. Datura, a lovely little friend of mine, sprang from the ground, and all was good. I would eat her leaves at night, 2 or 3 at a time. At first I would make tea, then I just ate them right off the plant. I loved the disorientation, the people who didn't exist, and not knowing what the fuck was going on. After going crazy about 20 times on the tea in total, I was able to handle myself well under full Datura disorientation. I knew how to handle walking, I knew who was real and who wasn't. One point though, I was taking a stronger dose than I usually did, and I ended up talking to this man. He wasn't real of course, I just knew it. And I'd figured out that I could stick my hands through anyone who wasn't real. This man put down the pipe that he was smoking on my bed, stood, and said to me, "So you know that I am not real?" And I turned to him, nodded, and then he reached over and stuck his hand right through me. This completely destroyed all sense I had of reality at that point, and I spent the next 2 days sure of that fact that I was the only not real person out there. During these experiences, I would look out my window at night and see different landscapes, completely believing that they were real. At one point, I went outside and walked right into my kitchen, started to cook myself up some pancakes, only to find myself naked in my front yard. I'd see the same things a lot. When I looked at my ceiling at night, I would see these glowing worms all over the place. After a while, I got bored of the plain old Datura and started adding morning glories to the teas that I made. I'd put around 100 seed pods in the tea, and this made the experience more visual. The people I saw became less of shadows and started to have whole lives which I would witness whenever I visited their world. They became more playful and talked to me more and more as time went on. My trips would start with me hearing voices, and then they would develop into extremely complex visions and worlds growing in my room, developing into ever more interesting stories. I wish I could gain these visions without that horrible dry mouth though. One day while in Datura, I saw some amanitas, bright red ones with white spots, or so I thought. I picked a whole patch of them, putting them in my pockets. I ate 3 big ones and prepared myself for the complete mindfuck that comes with eating soma. But the only thing I got out of it was that horrible feeling in my stomach. I heard a voice in my ear whispering something. I couldn't understand it at first. Then it came to me. Throw up. Throw up. It started shouting at me. It was this horrible, womanly type voice. Death. Death. So I did just that. I puked my brains out and felt much better afterwards. Later, when I was back in reality, I stuck my hand in my pocket and pulled out what was clearly a death cap. I don't know why I'm not dead. I think my mind must have had some intuition as to the fact that they were not soma, and so it was my body's attempt to stay alive. But I still have this weird feeling that Datura was with me that day, and actually saved my life. Oh crap, that's a load of shit. I believe in science, I think. Oh yeah, and don't actually do Datura unless you actually like to lose your mind, having no grasp on reality, or if you hate not being able to read for a while afterwards. But don't worry, it always goes away. But sometimes, the people don't. A Different World. A Datura trip report by Peaceful Tripper 05, posted to earwid.org, June 27th, 2004. The last few years of my life have been full of highs, trips, and life-changing experiences. First it was weed, then shrooms, on past peyote and acid, and finally, to Datura. The elusive Datura is, as it turns out, not so elusive in the city of Austin, Texas. A year back, some of my friends, looking for a new kind of trip, discovered Datura growing in the yard of a neighbour. They made tea from it and had what they said to be a strange, scary, yet awesome experience. At the time, I was still striving to sample LSD and decided to stay away from Datura for now. But as time went on, I too desired a different trip. It was April 2004. 2 days after the conclusion of the local Bob Marley Fest, the day after a bud-filled 420, a friend and I went to the house where the Datura was said to be found. Having researched the plant and its appearance, we easily identified it and dug up 3 plants, taking the root bulbs, the leaves, the seed pods, and the flowers. We then took our prize back to my house. My parents were asleep at the time, so we commenced in brewing up a tea. We chopped up 2 of the root bulbs, 2 seed pods, and about 8 good-sized leaves. We then threw all of that in a pot with 3 cups of water and let it boil on medium heat for about an hour and a half. We then strained it until it came to about 1.5 cups of a dark, amber liquid. Both of us drank about 2 to 3 shots of the liquid and sat down to watch the movie Fear and Loathing in Las Vegas. About halfway through the film, my friend got up to get a glass of water, commenting that his mouth was incredibly dry. It was only when he said this that I realised my mouth too was extremely dry. We then both went into the kitchen to get ourselves some cold glasses of water, and continued this way for a while, constantly drinking. About an hour and 15 minutes after I drank my tea, I began to feel almost drunk. My movements were stiff, and I once again ran into the side of the doorway when walking through it. About the time the movie ended, my friend said he had to go outside to take a piss. After he left though, things began to change. The room around me seemed to be enveloped in a haze. Dave Chappelle's face started to melt on the screen of the TV, and then the whole screen seemed to drip out of the box. Slightly alarmed by this new development, I left the living room and walked down the hallway to my room. Upon arriving in my room, I turned on some music and lit up a joint. As I was sitting in the easy chair, the joint in my hand abruptly vanished, enlightening me to the fact that there had never been a joint in the first place. As I was sitting there, trying to come to terms with the fact that I had been smoking an imaginary joint and wondering what had ever happened to my friend, the room around me began to breathe. Walls moving in and out rhythmically, and a strange, high-pitched screaming in the distance. Without warning, tiny, 6-inch tall green men began to materialize all around my feet. They appeared to be busy little fellows, seeing as how they were scurrying this way and that. I walked from my room to the front yard, where I saw my friend standing in the street having a conversation with my mum's car of all things. It turns out there was a woman on the car with whom he talked for about an hour. About this time, many people began to appear to me, some of which I recognized, and some which I did not. The night from here on out was only a haze, though I vaguely remember dancing with nude tree spirits and playing chess in the middle of the street with my friend and an assortment of strange beings. Overall, my experience with Datura was relatively peaceful and enchanting. It is a drug both dangerous and magical, and it can change one's life, possibly for the better, possibly for the worse, and also change their perception of the world in which we live. Lycanthropic ancestor blame. A Datura trip report by Zafuru69, posted to Irwid.org, December 27th, 2006. I've always enjoyed the effects of meditation and breathing techniques. In college, I began to use yoga, visualization, and breath control methods to induce visions and out-of-body experiences. Over the last 3 years, I've begun to experiment with psychoactive plants in conjunction with the aforementioned methods. So far, my results have been excellent, and I would like to share my latest journey with you. On March the 13th, 2005, at 8 PM in New Orleans, I stepped out into the backyard and harvested 5 trumpet flowers and 3 large leaves off the tree. I rinsed them gently and placed them in 20 ounces of boiling water for 5 minutes with the cover on the pot. I allowed them to steep for 5 more and poured myself a cup of the spicy smelling brew, which was a lovely light green. Positioning myself in a comfortable chair with my back straight, I began to visualize green light flowing from the cup to my face and body. I then placed my headphones on and began to listen to Black Sabbath. I really get into a great trance state while grooving to Ozzy. Once I achieved the familiar sensation of my body expanding beyond itself, I drank the entire cup of tea. This was at 8:45 PM. In 10 minutes, I was very thirsty and unaware of the fact that I was already having visions. This was the marked difference between my previous experiences with hallucinogenic substances. I am a lucid dreamer and have always been aware of when I am dreaming and have the ability to decide and control my actions, even when perception and sensation during the dream state is as real as in my waking life. This ability has carried over into my journeys with self-induced trance and psychotropics. This was not the case with the trumpet flower, however. I felt my self-induced trance not affected. 2 men walked into the room and asked if I knew how to play gin rummy. I answered no, but that I could learn quickly. They sat down and we commenced to play. It was not unusual for people I'd never met to just walk into this house, as we have a large and warm community in this area, and I assumed they were friends. I invited them down to the kitchen for food, and one of my pals that lived there was making toast. After I drank my second cup of tea, my house pal, who I'll just refer to as E, asked me who I was talking to. I then turned and pointed to the card player, number 1 and number 2, introducing them to E, and E said, "Dude, no one is there, what are you on?" I had a good laugh with the cardsman, and we three concluded that it was E whose vision was off. I sat on a stool at the counter and had a third cup as the rest of E's housemates came in from a party they had been at. To my confusion, they all agreed with E. There was no one there. It was only then that I realised just how hard the Datura had hit me with alarming speed, passing right under my radar. My usual sharp awareness and self-control were nowhere to be seen, and I have never before exceeded my set dosage, which I had intended to be only 1 cup, and here I was, with the third cup totally drained. When I looked back at E, I said, "Oh shit, I'm so stoned right now." As soon as I said the word stoned, the most intense body high I've ever felt hit me like a truck. I felt one with the wooden stool on which I sat. Very slowly, and with great effort, I stood up and walked to the stairs. I began to feel a heat upon my skin like the rays of the sun, and found myself transfixed by an alarming increase in all 5 senses, and had to be helped upstairs and set on the couch. As soon as my ass hit the cushion, everyone vanished, and I found myself alone in the house, which was now a cross between my home, E's home, and the set of Jumanji. Felt something tingle in my nose and smelt what I knew to be prey. No mental pause occurred between me sitting on a couch as a human and shifting into a large wolfen creature. The metamorphosis was smooth and painless, filled with great energy, and I soon began my hunt, and there I went. Up and down the halls, the stairs, and through the trees, I gave joyous chase to a cat. Poor house cat in retrospect. At some point, I had no grasp of time by now, my human pals once again materialised, and upon seeing them I determined to make it clear that the cat was my prey, and they were just oddly shaped competition. Asserting my dominance consisted of me nipping, headbutting, and corralling poor E and the others into a room. It was at that point I was back in the originally shaped house, as well as being human, but also 3 years old. All of this feeling totally natural to me at the time. I even began to play tag and eat the buttons off of my shirt. I eventually realised I had to pee, so I went to the bathroom and convinced myself that the tub was the toilet, commencing to whiz into the tub and onto the floor. Seeing as I was 3 years old, I couldn't figure out how to pull up my pants, and so I decided to go without them. Upon exiting the bathroom, I entered into a great dance hall filled with people dancing to blues and patting me affectionately on the head as I passed by. I ran into another room, and I was in a hospital lobby watching an excellent show about my family and its ancestral heritage and occult teachings. Then, I was an adult again, and aware of the odd fact that my ass was exposed to everyone, and bless their hearts, he and his housemates, I put some briefs on me and tried to quiet myself down. Right now, I felt like I'd smoked an entire ounce of marijuana and drank 4 pots of coffee on top. Accordingly, I began to recite all of the occult knowledge that I'd just been taught, while running as fast as possible all around the house, until I was sure that I'd memorized everything. During this whole process, I was relentlessly teased by the doors and walls of the house. They kept trying to mess up my memorization process. They'd jump in front of me, knock me in the head, and stick out the baseboard feet to trip me. Despite their efforts though, I succeeded in locating my notebook and pen, and in very loopy large print, inscribed my new teachings. These are actually an amazingly informative several chapters, and now I'm also very good at playing gin rummy, I must say. After several unmeasured moments of hilarity and ghost watching, I found myself lying on my back watching all of the ghosts I've been talking to slowly melt up into the ceiling. By the time this was occurring, it was early morning, and after several more mild visual hallucinations, like dancing fairies around the oat bran box, as well as folks from other states randomly appearing and vanishing, I started to feel sober, but still very hyperactive and lacking an appetite at all. I looked at E's watch to find that it was 9:35 AM. I'd been tripping for over 12 hours. Lingering effects that I noted were a difficulty focusing visually on near items and feeling absolutely no need for sleep. I guess you could say I'm all done. Shared hallucinations. A Datura trip report by Sean. Posted to Iruid.org, July 31st, 2004. I took this stuff along with 3 friends in Israel. It was by far the strangest event in all of our lives. We all saw the same hallucinations, if they were. But first off, I noticed we had speech impairment. Then the rules of reality would change. They all started getting wanderlust. As the girls got up to just walk, I would guide them back to our camp spot. The other guy was literally running around in a circle on the beach, making a yin-yang in the sand. And then he'd start crawling on his belly. I felt an overwhelming urge to sleep, but I was worried about the girls. I was a bit bored, so I started flipping a coin. And of course, the fucking coin disappeared in midair, and the 3 of us all saw it happen at eye level. I looked around where it could have possibly landed, but it was gone. So I repeated, and the same thing happened once again. The girls started applauding, thinking I was doing a magic trick. I just thought, oh shit, this is gonna be one serious trip. I tried to smoke my cigarettes, but I couldn't get them to my mouth. I would try a couple times and they would disappear. The girls would once again clap, thinking I was doing a magic trick. I finally had to use my free arm as a sort of guide to get the cigarette to my mouth. Honestly, the best way I could describe it was as if my head wasn't even solid. So yeah, it was to be the most freakish night of our lives. I passed out for half an hour after, I think. When I woke up, all 3 of them were gone. I fought the urge to wander and stayed with our stuff. I couldn't even read my watch, I had blurred vision, and I couldn't even piss. Felt like a burning urinary tract infection. I was thirsty as hell, but forced myself to take sips from my canteen, which, like the cigarette, I had to guide to my mouth. Now, here is the really bizarre part. I saw these nature people everywhere, and they saw me. Some of them communicated with me without even speaking. Others just straight up scared the shit out of me. They were deformed like burnt people. I genuinely thought a mental hospital was allowing their deformed, freakish lunatics to wander the beach right before the sunrise, before the tourists and regular folks showed up. Of the 2 types of beings I encountered, I had the impression one was good and the other was malevolent. They could disappear instantly if you looked away. Throughout the night, I was visited physically in front of me by my friends. They all had various things to say, like, "Where are the keys to the room?" We didn't even have a room, and the conversations and inquiries were totally illogical. When I looked away, they would also disappear. In the morning, they came back, minus the guy. He came back that next evening. They all reported the same things. Normal people disappeared, and we were in a world of these nature things and people whose pastime was playing hide and seek. All the cars in the city were gone, and the city streets were completely empty. We all had conversations with each other, and could recall them, but it appeared we were physically at the other person's location, even though we were all actually miles away from each other. The guy ended up running down a highway that he said contained no cars, which is literally impossible, and said he sat on a doorstep in a town miles away from the city we were in, when a woman came to the door and recognized him from a picture. She invited him in and introduced herself as his mother's second cousin. He had no idea where she lived, who she was, and where he was. She showed him the picture of her and his mother, and his picture that was sent 2 years before, and allowed him to call home. Then, she drove him back to where we were. We honestly don't know what happened that night, except for 1, we all had the same hallucinations, 2, we all interacted with each other throughout the night, though we were actually apart, and 3, we all believe we visited some other place, dimension, whatever you want to call it. I'll tell you something though, be cautious. There are totally new rules to this, and it seems like it can be a dangerous place, this whole other dimension. And yeah, all of our watches had lost about an hour, varied. I honestly wouldn't fuck with this stuff, you know. Maybe 5,000 years ago, or when people respected this kind of thing, it would be a different story. But I can assure you, that time is long gone now. Imaginary friends may not be nice. A Datura trip report by Ryan. Posted to Iruid.org, November 21st, 2003. So here's my experience with Datura. It's definitely not a pleasant one, I must say. It's one in which I will turn you away from using this drug. It all started one day when my friend John moved back from Las Vegas with a trash bag full of this stuff. The fruit, or whatever you would call it, was the size of a baseball. We didn't really know what part of the plant would be the most effective in making the utterly disgusting tea, so we split open the fruit and seeds and boiled all of it. My mum even witnessed the whole process, calling us stupid. After 10 minutes, we poured the tea into a 42-ounce cup, which we split in half. We sat down on the couch with no idea what this tea was about to do to us. At 11:30 p.m, 15 minutes after drinking the tea, we began to feel very drunk, and my guitar sounded quite unusual. John started laughing uncontrollably and kept insisting that he needed to take a piss. When I told him to take a piss, he just pissed on my bathroom floor. And then I realised I had got myself into something I wouldn't want anybody else to experience ever. After about 2 hours of watching John drink out of imaginary drinking fountains, picking peach pits off the ground, as well as gluing my car keys to the wall with my mum's nail glue that he'd found, I decided, at 4 AM, to wake my grandma up, crawling into her bed military style. I told her that we had drank some tea and that John is hallucinating and needed to take him home. So we drove 50 miles, and the whole time, John was just trying to jump out of the car. He'd removed the headrests from the seats and tried to throw them out the window. For some reason or another, I wasn't as messed up as John, but that was soon to change. When we arrived, I could not explain to my grandmother where he lived. We turned around and headed back to my grandmother's house. On the way, we dropped John off at a friend's house because my grandmother could not handle us both at the same time. So at 6 AM, this is about the time I could not distinguish my imaginary friends from real people at all. I began to talk to people that weren't there the entire following day. The fact that they would talk to me for 5 minutes and then disappear was not unusual for me. I sat on my bed for hours when I finally got up, asking my grandmother how long I'd exactly been sleeping for. She told me I'd been sitting on my bed staring at the wall for several hours now. So meanwhile, John had escaped. He went to the neighbour's house, walked in, turned the TV on, and began to dance. The cops arrived, asked him what his name was, and he said John. They proceeded to ask questions like, "Where do you live?" His response being, "Everywhere." By that time, my friend had begged the police to let him go and not press the issue. The police told my friend if they ever saw him in town again, he would be arrested for sure. Well, if your cup of tea is to black out for several hours, hang out with your imaginary friends for 2 days, as well as having your pupils dilated for 3 days, as well as being very painful, I still suggest never to drink or eat anything that has to do with this plant. Just remember, your imaginary friends may not always be nice. A Walk with the Dead. A Datura trip report by Sage. Posted to irwid.org, May 1st, 2002. I've been taking different forms of hallucinogens for years now, from acid to DMT, but never have I experienced a trip so unnerving as the Datura trip I'd recently been on. I've had acid melt things, or I've acquired eagle vision on DMT, but every trip since this one has been distortions of reality, and not true hallucinations of things or people that weren't really there. I heard that there was some Datura growing in a nearby park from a friend of mine that just ate some of the flowers. He told me he was still tripping, and he ate the flowers 3 days ago. He told me a little about his trip, and I knew I had to try this plant somehow. I figured it was more powerful for him because he isn't a regular tripper. His dose was 10 flower stalks, I think. So after eating 8 of these flowers, Bell shrugged off. It was very shortly thereafter that I began experiencing a body fry. It was much like a mushroom trip. The colours grew steadily brighter, and the tracer effect relative to acid settled in about 20 minutes. I wandered away from the friends I had dosed with and was walking by myself on a residential street. Kept trying to take a drag of my cigarette, but I realised that I didn't even have a smoke in my fingers to begin with. I was sure I was smoking a long cigarette though. I looked everywhere behind me and found nothing. This happened many times throughout the night. I heard someone walking behind me at one point during the trip. When I turned round, I saw my friend Trey behind me. I talked with him for a while, but as I walked, he wouldn't even answer anything that I asked him. And then I turned around to find a totally empty street instead. The next person I had seen was my friend Ron. I can't really remember what we talked about, because the moment I realised he had been dead for a year and a half, I did a double take. He then turned into a parking meter. I was so stunned, I'd forgotten the whole conversation. Another person I was asking directions from turned into a fence post. My friends tell me of some other crazy things I did which I don't quite recall, though they might be just messing with me. My friend Tree says that he was nowhere around me during my trip, and he is a person to trust. The next day, I ate 4 more flower stalks and went into a slightly less potent trip. The day after that, I smoked some really kind weed and started getting visuals again, but no visuals like the first day. I've taken many visual drugs and mind-altering substances in my time, but I honestly don't think I'll be tripping on this one ever again.
Unintelligent Experiment. A Datura trip report by Borealis, uploaded to earwid.org on February 17, 2007. Excuse the long intro, but it serves to show the lack of thought that can go into an experiment like this. Preamble. I was 17 years of age and had heard about a plant which could get you high. That fact, the name, and what it looked like was about the only information I had on Datura, known to me then by its colloquial name of malpit. Typical of my approach to the experiment, mindless, I only registered the name phonetically, and only later clicked that the direct translation of the Afrikaans malpit to English is mad seeds. I live in South Africa, by the way. Also, some half-baked methodology was told to me of having to put the seeds from the pod into the water. This apparently separated the good seeds from the bad seeds by a process of sinking or floating. The distinction of bad was understood to mean poisonous. Unfortunately, there was no clarity on whether the good seeds would float or sink, so the philosophy was advanced that since the method would leave us with a 50-50 chance of choosing all good or all bad seeds, it would be better to rather dispense with the method altogether and just eat all the seeds, thereby softening the blow of a possible poison attack. Good work, team. It was an interesting situation the day I ate the seeds. I was a boarder at my school, and I had a day off with virtually nobody in the dormitory. This was due to the exam timetable leaving a few days free, at which opportunity most of the people just went home. My home was too far away to justify this, so I stayed. I made an illegal journey out of the school grounds with a friend to go and buy some weed, but we didn't remember the directions very well and got a bit lost. We happened to walk past a Datura plant which grows along the way, and I remember that I had some dried seeds in my cupboard at the dorm, so the decision was taken to try some. The seeds. I had half a handful of seeds approximately, on a relatively empty stomach. It was winter. Spent time throwing a large tin's plastic lid at as a frisbee in the dorm waiting for the effects with a friend. First effects were a very dry mouth and the off feeling sometimes accompanied with the flu. About 45 minutes in, I decided to walk up to the school to obtain an energy drink and some pie at the canteen. The first mental effects were like being stoned, and I sat on the side of the road leading up to school to enjoy it. My memory is affected from this point on, and I can only give flashes as I remember things. After a blank spot, I got back to the dorm with my pie and drink, but my mouth was too dry to swallow either of them. I discovered a frighteningly shriveled penis without urination capability when I went to the bathroom, as well as eyes without near focus capability. These two things set me worrying, and for the rest of the day things took a cold and lonely menacing character. It was about 10:30 AM at this point. I still don't know what happened to my friend, but apparently he didn't feel anything, and drifted off to chill with some other friends, totally unaware of my situation. So negative introspection and isolation were in order, and I wandered off to the school sports field. On the way, and whenever I was walking, my foot seemed to slip through an oil patch with a nasty jerk, and I would closely inspect the ground for this oil patch but would not find it. Somehow I registered that because my eyesight was affected by the seeds, Maybe I couldn't see the oil patch. That the oil patch might not be real did not occur to me. And so it was with my hallucinations throughout the day. I would take it for granted that they were real, but if it were proven unreal, it simply added to the negative, menacing backdrop to the whole scene. I would rather attempt to find the reality of the hallucinations than admit that something was seriously wrong with my world. The next memory is of a gigantic network of insect populations crawling into and out of a shadow which fell across a painted concrete wall. The image persisted for a long while until a banging noise interrupted my reverie, and I realised I was actually sitting on the grandstand watching people on the sports field. That kind of thing would occur too. I would lose awareness and float inside a perception, somewhat pleasant, until it broke and the cold loneliness would be felt stronger with each return of it. The closest thing I've experienced to it is the delirious thoughts during sickness or fever, but on a bigger scale. Somehow I remember the banging noise as golf balls hitting the grandstand. I may have attempted sleeping because I remember getting up from a lying position. The stands were metal and ice cold. I was astounded to find that my feet weighed near 8 kilograms each. I think that's about 4 pounds. Very heavy. Now my memory is flooded with conversations that I tried to add to, but I found myself talking aloud to no one. An extremely lonely and confusing feeling. I remember a long conversation with a person which was different in that it was vividly real, and I'm still tempted to think that it was real, because we talked about the seeds and how I was high, etc. It's just that this person had left the school about a year earlier. If it was a hallucination, then it was an awesome accomplishment of the human mind. At some point during the trip, I was in bed watching my cupboard float up and down and left and right, etc. in reverie again, when I felt the need to chase after a shadow I saw from the corner of my vision, some quick and sinister thing. Each time I turned a corner, it turned some corner up ahead. The last thing it zipped into as I turned a corner was the dark cavity underneath someone's bed. Scared shitless, I got back to my blankets without looking under the bed. Spiders crawled underneath my blankets up towards my face. Even with the dormitory so empty and the hotel masters all up the school, I was extremely lucky to stay out of trouble. There were signs that stuff happened which I don't remember, like grass down the back of my jersey and posters that were found in the dustbin. Other things I remember: showering and passing somebody's shampoo and hearing the bottle hit the floor, nobody in the next stall to pass to, and talking to people would vanish into thin air, visual ghosts at the edge of vision, and small reveries in immersive visualizations. They all happened in front of that cold, awful, lonely, emotional background. Even the frightening aspects were flat and lonely, just cold. It occurred to me at some point that I was walking around hell. This feeling left me soul stunned. Book. A little bit of heaven floated down out of the darkness as I was exhaustedly drifting off that night. Some kind of book appeared with impressive clarity, like the ultimate reverie, and it wiped all traces of the cold and lonely away, leaving me struck with a fresh, smiling amazement. I remember nothing as to the content of the book, but to read from it was the most satisfying thing in the world. I can't relate any experience to it other than religious ones I've had at other times, but more so this time. I could experiment with the book, like looking ahead from the line I was reading to the upcoming paragraph indentations to see if they would be the same by the time I got to them. They would stay the same, though if I jumped ahead the words would appear all jumbled and unreadable. I could think to myself, I have to remember what I'm reading. This book has everything I need to know. But as soon as I got to the end of a page, I would wake up with my hands shooting into the air trying to turn the page. I would forget what I was reading instantly. Someone else I know has also had a similar experience when he tried Datura, despite my warnings. He would have a much worse experience than mine. But the fact that two people can hallucinate something so similar and be so awestruck by it makes me think that it must be more than just a hallucination. I never told him of the book, so he hallucinated it independently of any suggestion. I think I've made this too long. I'll just say that my eyesight was still bad the next day, and without being able to study the previous day, I ended up with a 12% for math. If you're going to experiment with anything, be careful, be clever, respectful, patient, and willing to not do it. My opinion is don't try Datura. Try something else instead. The rewards are not worth the effort and danger. I thought the book was most excellent, but will never go through that cold loneliness to get to it again.